Johnny Appleseed's real name was John Chapman, and he's known for planting apple orchards throughout Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. But he became a legend because he was a generous, kind-hearted, itinerant minister. He left his home in Massachusetts when he was only 18 years old to go and start his first apple nursery at the headwaters of the Susquehanna. And the way it generally worked is that he would start a nursery, and then he'd find a manager to look after it, and he'd leave that manager in charge, and he'd go away, and when he came back again 2 years later, he would collect the money that the trees had been sold for. And sometimes they were sold for money or credit, and sometimes they were sold for, bartered away for goods, like used clothing or food. And in the meantime, when he'd been away, he would have gone and planted another nursery. And he would spend his time planting nurseries and sharing the gospel. This is what one pioneer wrote. "We can hear him now, just as we did on that summer day when we were busy quilting upstairs and he lay at the door. His voice rising, denunciatory and thrilling, strong and loud as the roar of the waves, and then soft and soothing, like the balmy airs that quivered around the morning glories that gathered around his gray beard. His was a special eloquence at times, and he was undoubtedly a man of genius." Johnny Appleseed, John Chapman, preached to whomever would listen, and he had a special ministry among the Native Americans. And he founded his life on faith and charity, and the result was apple orchards in 4 different states, and the Word of God in thousands and thousands of people's lives. He actually lived out this parable of the sower. You know, I think Jesus liked telling parables, and I imagine that the crowds that came to listen to him were really quite entranced. They liked it that Jesus would tell a story on a slant, giving it a different way to hear the new information. Not like, you should do this, you should do this, but just inviting people to join him in the story. Listen to this. This is an interpretive translation from Eugene Peterson, who wrote the Message. "What do you make of this? A farmer planted seeds, and he scattered the seed on the road, and the birds came and ate it. Some of it fell on gravel, and then it sprang up quickly, but it didn't have strong roots. So when the sun came out, it just withered. Some fell on the weeds, and as it came up, it was strangled. And some fell on good earth and produced a harvest beyond the sower's wildest dreams." Are you listening to this? Are you really listening? We don't know who in the crowds was really listening or what they actually understood, whether they related in their hearts to one of the kinds of soils. I suppose that they would want to be good seed on good soil, because isn't that what we all really want? To lead a productive life centered on the love of God? But the disciples, they needed extra understanding, extra explanation. So Jesus takes them aside. He takes this small, more intimate group aside, and he teaches them. He explains how his message is going to be received. And he says, "When anyone hears the news of the kingdom and takes it and doesn't take it in, it just remains on their surface and can be plucked away like birds eating seeds." He could have been talking about the religious leaders of his day, because they were already antagonistic to the message. It was like their ears were closed and their hearts were hard. And then he continues and he talks about the seed that fell on the gravel, and he explains that it's like the people who hear and respond, but then fall away when difficulty comes. He could have been referring to the crowds, The crowds, oh, they flocked to hear him talk. They wanted to get to know that new preacher. And they pushed and shoved and tried to get near him. They lowered their friends from rooftops just to have his healing touch. And yet later, it was the crowds who yelled, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" What about the seeds that fall among the weeds? They're the people who hear the message but are distracted by worry. Illusions about getting ahead and wanting more. Their faith is just like strangled right out of them. Could refer to the rich young man. He heard the stories with Jesus. He asked how he could follow, and then he left, sadly, because he wasn't able to put aside his wealth to follow the teachings of Jesus. Could also refer to the disciples, because time and time again they don't understand clearly and they have things explained over and over again. Now the seed cast on the good earth is like people who hear, and they take the good news and they produce a harvest beyond the farmer's wildest dreams. Some scholars think that this refers to the disciples, because they did go out and share the world and create new church. Some other scholars say no, because what about Jesus betraying? What about Judas betraying Jesus? What about Peter denying Jesus? And what about all the other disciples who, when tough times came, fled and deserted him? Besides, the greatest harvest came from the areas where it was least expected to produce anything. The tax collectors, the prostitutes, the sinners. They were the ones who were actually opened to the Word. They turned their lives around and they followed in the way of God. On any particular day, at any particular time in the day, we could be any type of soil. Hard, heart-hardened, shallow, world-weary, or fruitful. The delightful characteristic about a parable is that each time we enter the story, we can come out at a different place. Sometimes, or most of the times, we always approach this parable thinking about the soil, the seed, and how we are responsibility for taking the word and nurturing it in our lives to give back the fruit. But what if we flip that around? What if we came at it with another approach about the farmer? That silly farmer is just scattering seed all over the place, wasting it on every kind of soil. Modern farmers don't behave like that. Everything is meticulously planned ahead. The plowing, the planting, the irrigating, the fertilizing. Everything is exquisitely planned to minimize waste and maximize profits. Modern farmers are tempted to try and control all the elements so that they can get a good crop, and then they can take credit for that crop, forgetting that God has sent the sun and the rain. You know what? Modern pastors, modern church leaders, they're tempted to control all the elements of discipleship, inviting people into a life with Christ. And then when the church grows, they're tempted to take credit for it. They sometimes forget that the Spirit has a much larger role in the process. We do sow seeds of God's love, but we have to trust the Spirit to do the rest. Oh, but isn't trust hard? You know, I worry about the church. I worry about the people of Delmont. I worry that the world that we live in is so full of addictions and violence and malignant poverty that it just wears down our souls. A world like that creates apathy, cynicism, which just peck up seeds like hungry birds. I worry about the community, the people that live just up and down this street. our neighbors, our friends, our family, even our own children? Have they become so hardened to the word of the church that they just don't want to hear it anymore? I worry about the people who run after the shallow promises of prosperity preachers, the ones that say, oh, just pray and send me $10 and everything will be fine. Pray hard, play hard, and all will be well. I worry about the lonely faith of the people who say that they are more spiritual than religious. Because when the tough times come, they don't have that community. It's just God and me. They don't have the strong roots of the community buoying up their faith, and so their spirituality could just wither away. I worry about the thorns of our world, the obsessive ambition, and the pursuit of power, and wealth and consumption without any regard to the greater good. I worry these things will strangle the spirit right out of us. But worry is not what Jesus focuses on. Jesus calls our attention to the seeds that bloom and grow and put down strong roots of faith and then produce a crop beyond the wildest dreams. It's not an image of worry. It's an image of trust and hope. Jesus trusted 12 disciples with the fate of the church, just a handful of weak, slow to understand disciples who eventually followed that example of the extravagant sower, sharing the words with many and transforming the whole world. Jesus asks us to open our tightly closed fists of control and let the seeds of trust and hope fall where they might. Now, I'm not suggesting that you run around like a noisy gong, just yakking on and on about the Bible. Rather, I'm suggesting that you reach out in love and do what you do best. Pray. Comfort others. Transport people who don't have cars to their appointments. Bring groceries to the homebound. Sit with those who mourn. Cook for the homeless. Do whatever it is that you do best. And then be glad when someone opens their life to God's love. You, the people of Delmont, are known for being a praying church and for following up on those prayers. I've been told that Sheila Aker kept on asking prayers for her friend and her friend's ill husband. She stuck by her friend, especially when the husband was in the hospital. And your former pastors were so moved by her compassion that they went to see that gentleman in the hospital. He didn't belong to the church. He hadn't visited here. And that's how Anna Hicks heard the invitation to be part of this Delmont family. The community reached out to her in a time of need, not because they thought, oh, there's a good prospect for her church, we could use her. No, because they desperately wanted to share God's healing love. And Anna bloomed, and she grew, and she put down roots. And she gave back to her church with keen accounting skills. That's not to say that every minute of Anna's life is going to be a bed of roses, because it's not. There's going to be difficulties. There's difficulties in the past, and there's difficulties in the future. But when she meets those challenges, she's going to have firm roots of faith, and she will not be plucked apart, or wither, or have the Spirit strangled right out of her. Rather than endlessly worrying about the things that are not in our control, let's follow the example of Jesus and cast seeds of love and hope exuberantly. We can never be sure where the Spirit is going to bring growth. In the desert, on a rocky cliff, in a garden with a careless gardener. The parable demands that we sow seed and leave the rest up to God. Now, giving up control is not the American way. We're drivers, but it's God's way. Let's just go out and throw around some seeds. Amen.